Hello, hi, what's up everyone? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and I kind of say this every video, but it's been a minute. I don't know what to tell you guys, but if you don't know, I launched a newsletter, so that has taken up some time, not too much time, but it's a fun little newsletter where I talk about the books I'm reading, fashion, fun little things. I'd love if you would subscribe, link in the bottom, and without further ado, today we're gonna be talking about my August and September reads, a little monthly wrap up. Today happens to be like October 29th, so I could do, October as well, but I'm not going to because I'm hoping, God willing, to finish at least like 1 or 2 more books before the month ends. Anyways, let's just dive right into it. In August, I read 9 books. In August, I read 9 books, and the first one that I read was Western Lane by Chetna and Maroo. This book was longlisted, shortlisted, I don't know. It's something Booker related, but TBH with you guys, I have like lost the plot with that. I don't know what's happening. I don't know where we're going, whatever. I tried to read the books. I didn't get very far. I've only read like 2.5 out of the 13. So Western Lane by Chetna and Maroo is a very quiet, soft novel, incredible writing, like wonderful, fabulous sentences. This is the story of a young girl whose mother passed away, and it's like fairly recent, loss in the family, and she has 2 older sisters, and squash, like the game, plays a prominent role in their life. They are all 3 girls are trained by their father. They know how to play, and then the youngest, who's our protagonist, she happens to have the most skill in it, and we're seeing like a couple of months in her life as she's, playing squash more, as she enters into this championship, as she develops feelings for this friend that she has. And it's just a very quiet, subtle, soft moving book that is exploring loss and family and sportsmanship. If I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't really love books about sports or movies about sports. It's like not for me. However, this book was well written. And then we have Angels by Denis Johnson. This book was a debut. It was his debut, and it's really well written. It's an incredible book. It's really intense. It tells a story of Bill and a woman who's Jamie. Bill and Jamie, who are 2, Americans on the run, I guess you could say. They are escaping their lives and, taking buses across America, going from like bus to motel to highway to bars. It's a very fast-paced life, and there's a lot of violence in their life because that's just the nature of their world. And you see how that like violence escalates, how Bill tends to be someone who is engaging in violence because just the constraints of the world are such that he has to. And then Jamie is someone who unfortunately has violence enacted upon her. And the book is exploring a lot of American ideals, and there's a lot of exploration of religion in the book because different characters, the book is called Angels, so you could kind of expect that, right? Like there's going to be a theme of religion that pops up, and it's very like American in that regards, and the different factions or way that can manifest. And it's a really explosive book. I think it's really good for summer because they do, I think towards the end of the book, end up in Arizona or like one of those really hot states, and there's just a crazy vibe to the book, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was phenomenal. It might just be one of the books that makes it to my top 10, but who really knows? Too early. Can't make any judgments just yet. After that, I read Astragal by, what is her name? Albertine. Last name starts with an S. I'll have the cover of the book here so you can see that. But this book is also very interesting. And I think you could say in my newsletter, I did a compare contrast between the 2 books, Angels and Astragal, because both books happens to start with A, but really they're actually both books that are exploring the disenfranchised. Astragal takes a story of this young girl who's, I don't know, maybe 16 to 19 when the book starts, who had been imprisoned in a juvenile detention court, whatever, in France. And so she escapes the prison. This happens on the first 10 pages by jumping over the prison walls, and she hurts her astragal bone, which is like in the foot. And she meets this man who saves her, who's also like a former convict, and it's just an exploration of her life and how she kind of gains agency or tries to maintain her agency in the time and space in France. Like this is the 50s, 60s, where there isn't exactly a lot of autonomy, but she still is very enterprising. And I think both books are good to read at the same time because they are exploring the disenfranchised, but obviously in different times and settings, like America in the 80s versus France in the 50s, 60s. If you want to read those books, maybe try it like that, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Oh, and then I read this fantasy book, Beautiful Dreams by Fortuna by KJ Sutton in the Fortuna Sworn series. I think Beautiful Dreams is the last one before we get the new release that should be coming out, I think, in 2024, and wow, that book was a doozy. I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about it because it's the 4th book in a series and I don't think many of you guys have probably read it, but yeah, I'm looking forward to the new one. Then I finally finished Pond by Claire-Louise Bennett. This book is very slim. It should not have taken me as long as it did. I think it probably took me 2 or 3 months. It is Fitzcarraldo's highest selling book, according to this article that I read, so maybe things have changed since then, but I really wanted to enjoy it. And it's not to say that I didn't not enjoy it, it's just a really stylized, mannered book, and the sentences, like on the individual level, phenomenal. They're incredibly like well crafted, great sentences, but there's no plot to this book. It's entirely all vibes, and I think for that reason, even though it is quite slim, and maybe you should read it in like one sitting or something closer to that, I would just get disengaged because it's just wasn't compulsive enough for me to keep reading, even though the writing on the sentence level is great. Then I read If I Survive You, which was another one of those long-listed one of those long-listed Booker books. And If I Survive You is a collection of connected short stories about a family in Florida who have roots in Jamaica. So the family moves from Jamaica to Miami. It's a family of 4, mother, father, 2 brothers, and we follow mostly the men in this family, and we're seeing how they're trying to make their life in America and the struggles that they're up against, and you see their relationship with America, with their homeland, with each other, and there's a lot of questions of family. Sorry, there's like someone outside, they like just pulled over, so I'm a little distracted, but I think there's something wrong with our car. If I Survive You tells a story of what it's like to be from Jamaica in America, trying to make it, and the constraints that are placed upon them. But what was really interesting to see how the environment plays a role in their life. So the hurricanes that affect Miami and the ramifications it has on their family, like at one point their house is decimated by the hurricanes and they have to rebuild it. You can see how in some ways that the hurricane is almost a character. The weather, the environment is a character. Then I read Open Throat by Henry Hoke, which is very, very slim. I did this on audio. It's like 2-3 hours. It's a lot of fun. It's the story of a mountain lion in LA, just, trying to figure things out in this modern world, and it's interacting with humans, and you're seeing how, our modern life looks to an animal of the wild, and it has a very explosive ending, almost like you can't deny who you are, but at the same time there's a reason for it, and I think it's a lot of fun. Then I read, because I was thinking of reading Pearl, which is also long listed and has a great cover, but before I did that, I wanted to read the poem that inspired it. So Pearl is a poem from the medieval ages, like around the same time as Chaucer, I want to say. And the poem is by the Gawain poet. I could be completely wrong with that time period for this poem, but Pearl the book is inspired by Pearl the poem. So I read the poem first because then I was going to read the book. The poem has some really phenomenal language, and it's looking at a father who has lost his daughter, and I think the loss here is the daughter has died and she's now in heaven, and so there's this Christian imagery, but there's also some really beautiful language to describe the pearl, and it's very evocative and majestic, and I think that the poem is really worth reading. And I think on YouTube actually there's an audio reading of it, so that's kind of how I did it, and I really liked the poem, which is not normally something that I read, but I thought it was really good. Vagablonde by Anna Dorn, which is I think her first fiction book that she wrote, and it's kind of the precursor, if you would, to Exalted, because it does take some of the same characters and it gives you like the backstory. One of the characters that we see in Exalted is the protagonist of Vagablonde. So Vagablonde is a story, it's also like Exalted, so much fun, I really enjoyed it. It's just an awesome book. So Vagablonde tells a story of this young woman, 26, 27, who knows, fairly young. She's a lawyer, but she's actually you know, a SoundCloud rapper, and she gets involved with a group of kids who are also like creatives in LA, and they start making music, and it's just kind of her exploration. She's a lawyer, and so one of the girls who happens to end up in this musical group with them is one of her clients, and you know, you're exploring that relationship and are they going to get caught and what's going to happen. But then also Vagablonde is, you know, doing a lot of drugs and drinking, so it's very like intense in that regard. And I think it's just really good and lots of commentary about what does it mean to, like, how do you get what you want if what you want seems so outlandish, and you know, how can you live a creative life? I really liked it. Okay, those were all of my August reads. Now we're gonna move over to September. In September, I read 6 books, and it's just a really mixed bag of things. The first book that I read was Seasons of the Dragon by, I think, Natalie Wright. And this is a fantasy book, which was, you know, compulsive enough and tells a story. This young woman who happens to have 2 souls, her own and the soul of another, like within her psyche, and she's always waging it out, and it's a matter of like who's gonna win. But she finds out that she's actually involved in a much bigger plan, and that there's like this secret cult that wants to kill her. So there's a whole lot happening, and then like her father is murdered in the very beginning of the book, and then so she's trying to like survive. It's fun. However, I won't be continuing this series because I really didn't like how it ended, because there are dragons involved in this book, as it is called Seasons of the Dragon, but the way that the dragons are introduced into it, I don't really like. And I can't talk about it because then if I did, I would spoil the book for you. But it might be interesting if you want to read a fantasy book about dragons. Then I was, once again, I guess you could say, on a bit of a fantasy kick, and I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This book is kind of the beginning, I guess you could say, of Robin Hobb's world. Like, she's written a lot of books in this world, and Assassin's Apprentice tells the story of this bastard child who is taken to the castle and is like making his way in the world, and he happens to have magical powers, and you know, is adopted by the assassin, I guess you could say, to become, you know, the next assassin. And it is good, but there's like a lot of build-up, I guess you could say, and it's like the assassin, the protagonist is like now 80 years old or whatever, and he's like writing the story, so it's just a lot of setup, I think, for what would eventually be like the second and the third books. And I think I will continue with the series, I just don't feel the desire to do it immediately. And so in this world, you have the assassin, you have like a whole bunch of characters. You have the assassin's apprentice, you have the king's fool, and their relationship is quite interesting. And I think the author then makes a series about the fool, and yeah, cool world. Next up, we have Quiet Street by Nick McDonald, and this book I did on audio. It's very, very, very short. It's like 3 hours on audio, and it's a recent release, and the author is a very privileged white man, and he admits that, like, that's kind of what the book is about. And he's exploring how his education at like some fancy pants New York City all boys school taught him the language of the rich and the elite, and the like habits and hobbies that they have, and how it's like really just integrated into the education and the ramifications that it has. So he's looking at, you know, his schooling, but then also like post-grad, and like how the marriages that happen between the elites, and like what do those look like. And he's trying to get to the bottom of how can the privileged, incredibly rich people potentially, you know, even out the playing field, like the 1%ers, how they could, you know, open up and broaden that reach to everyone else. But he's not really like explaining the how. It's just more so an exploration of the pillars of power, I guess you could say. So if you're looking for answers for how like to even out that playing field, you won't really get it, but instead you'd get an exploration of, you know, markers of the elite. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say. I think he's had an interesting life. He got like his first book deal at the age of like 18 or something like that. And then I read Elvis and Me by Priscilla Presley, her memoir that was published in the 80s, which then Sofia Coppola was inspired to then make the movie Priscilla, which is coming out, I think, November, December, I don't know. So the book, I don't read a lot of celebrity memoirs, and there's like a really big fervor right now for celebrity memoirs. We have Paris and Britney, and there were others. And like, I went to the bookstore recently and I saw John Stamos from Full House has one, and I was like, I think I've had enough. and I like wanted to read the Paris one. I started it, but then I just dropped it. And anyways, Elvis and Me is the only one that I've actually read. We're looking at her childhood and her meeting Elvis, and then her, you know, convincing her parents to let her do her senior year in LA and live with Elvis, and like the life that they're building, and then how she kind of gains her autonomy. I think it was a really fascinating read because Priscilla Presley is incredibly smart. Like, that's the takeaway that I got from this book. Like, yes, she was groomed, and you know, it's an uncomfortable situation and there's definitely a power dynamic, but she is a really strong personality. Like, she has a strong inner character that enabled her to, you know, build a life for herself. And then once, you know, Elvis does eventually die, she's able to like revamp Graceland such that it becomes, you know, profitable. And it's just really fascinating, like the after as well as the actual book, because you're looking at how important it was to maintain a certain image, the cult of personality around Elvis, and you know, people like Elvis who have such charismatic personalities, and you know, they're quite tumultuous at the same time, because you know, they're quite giving, but they're also, you know, tottering on the edge of like almost freaking out at people. And you're just seeing that dynamic and how they can like surround themselves around characters like Elvis, and not all of them are always good. And the main thing about the book, though, because I'm getting a little distracted here, the main thing about the book is how Priscilla gains her autonomy and agency as a woman. And you have, you know, experiences. She does mention like when she has an affair, I think, with her dance teacher and that kind of stuff. And I really wish we went more into that. She kind of just like glosses over it in like a paragraph. It's just an aside, but you actually want more. Like, I wish she gave us a little bit more vulnerability, but she is really honest about things, from what I could tell. Like, who really knows? But I recommend it. I liked it. Then after that, I finally finished Solenoid. This book is very good, very long, could have been a little shorter. It's basically autofiction. Our author is, I don't want to give it away because I feel like it is good to just figure it out and suss it out, because probably like, I don't know, 200, 300 pages in, you could probably figure out what's going on, like what's the meta like reasoning for this story. But it's the story of a teacher who is also a writer and keeps a lot of journals and has a lot of really intense dreams and lives in a house in Bucharest, which has a solenoid in it. And there's like this very surreal and out of this world, otherworldly element to this story. There's like a lot of themes that come up in this book. There's the realities of the medicine world and practitioners in the 80s in Romania, and how grueling and nerve-wracking, scary it is. There's a lot about schooling, and also, you know, dreams and mathematicians and like philosophers and like books and libraries. It's really hard to talk about this book, and it's one of those things. The reading experience, let me talk about the reading experience. Obviously it took me a couple months to get through this, but there would be times where like you just don't want to read it, but then you finally convince yourself to read it, and you're like, okay, like I'm only going to read 20 pages, or I'm just going to read a chapter. But it is quite compulsive. Like, once you get into the flow of the story and things just wash over you and you kind of like don't want to stop. But then there's like this long paragraph, or not paragraph, chapters or whatever, where the narrator's looking at his journals, and like every time this man would pull out his journals to talk about his dreams, I was like, I don't care. So it's an experience reading this book. I really do think that this would be the kind of book that if you're an English student, undergrad, whatever, master's, PhD, it would kind of be really great for a thesis paper, I think, because there's so many themes, motifs, images that keep on reappearing, and there's like a lot of material to work through. But it's a really intense read, very surreal. I think it's definitely like a project to embark on if you're gonna read it, but it was fun. I just wish it could have been a tiny bit shorter, just like a little bit shorter. But yeah, that's that. Oh, and then the last thing that I read in the month of September was Manic Pixie E-Girl by Nate Lemick. I don't know how you say his last name. So if you don't know, if you're not on Book Talk, there's like a lot of controversy around this book, because Nate made a TikTok about how he was gonna only be reading female authors, and then people got mad at him, and I don't necessarily want to spend too much time talking about that, but that's just like context of like how this book entered my radar, and then I decided to read it. And there's 3 different, almost parallel storylines happening at the same time. You have this young guy, our protagonist, who's kind of like a sex addict, but it's not even just like a sex addict. He's like wants love and validation from women, but has a lot of shame around sex and desire. And then he ends up, you know, getting to know his neighbor who's a cam girl, and she has created a cult. And so it's funny. There's one line that I still think about that really made me laugh so much. It's like very early on. And the thing is, I just wish there was like, I think the book could have gone deeper. I think the characters felt a little flat, and we could have had more to chew on. Yeah. Okay. So with that, those are my August and September reads. I would love to hear what you read, what was best. If you read any of the books that I've read, what are your thoughts on those books? And yeah, hopefully soon there should be more videos, my October wrap up, as well as an end of the year tag, which Nathan tagged me in. And yeah, talk soon.